Chapter 7. Michaeline noted the slightly pale look of Lysica's skin. That and the shell-shocked look on her face. It was to be expected, after all. She hadn't just lost. She had just lost spectacularly. Michaeline was no swordmaster. He knew how to handle a blade, knew how to use it in battle, but he was pretty middling when it came to skill. Even he, with next to no dueling experience, except for what experience he gained from watching other people duel, could see that she had never stood a chance. Not at any point in time did Durin give an inch. Whether he had stepped back, it was only the slightest of movements, as the blade had passed by him, and when she had really pressed, giving it her all, Durin had stood there stoically and parried each and every attack. The duel had ended when Durin had wanted it to end, not a moment before or after that point. Michaeline had left Lauren to calculate his total winnings. He had no doubt it would be a rather substantial amount of money. If his mental math was anywhere near with the actual number, then it was almost a full year of work, and not the kind of year where you scrape by doing small escort contracts. The sort of year when you attack the contract board like it had insulted your mother, and pull down contract after contract with no stopping in between. He had no trouble putting a smile on his face as he approached the two, where they stood in the middle of the dueling grounds. Durin looking satisfied. Lysica looking shell-shocked. "Well, cousin," he said, slapping her on the shoulder and leaving it there, her eyes drifting up to look at him. A spark of anger in them, though not enough to break the ice that had formed over. "I think congratulations are in order," he said, still looking at her. "You bet against me," she said, her voice sounding a tad bit flat. "Yes," he said with a nod. "The odds were 400 to 1. I couldn't miss such an opportunity," he said with a smile. "Besides, look on the bright side. With such winnings, I will be able to afford a wonderful wedding gift for you and your new betrothed." He smiled and saw the familiar anger blaze up in her eyes. "Speaking of which..." He turned away from her before she could explode on him, and towards Durin, who had a slightly confused look on his face. "Welcome to the family, Durin," he said formally. Durin instinctively took Michaeline's hand and shook it. As he did so, a dawning realization came to him. He glanced over at Lysica, his eyes going slightly wide before narrowing down to slits. She wasn't looking at him. He had been tricked. The old man had told him of this, of the devious nature of women, had told him to watch out for their traps and tricks, and he had not taken his words to heart. He had not realized, or rather had not considered, that women were often used as pieces in a political and economical game board, and were often used to forge alliances, after all. There were many examples of women who married men to form alliances or to lock down allegiances. The old man had told him of the women who had thrown themselves at him in the attempt to get him trapped in the marriage contract. He had not defined how exactly he had wanted her as his prize, naively leaving it open for another to define for him, and so she had defined it in the best possible terms from her point of view. He looked over at Lysica, who was looking at Michaeline with that odd smile of hers, clearly pleased with herself. When the priestess had asked her what her wager was, she had defined it since he had not. He was still going to be getting her. It was just that he was now going to do so through marriage. Part of him was very, very pissed that she would take his words and use them against him like this, but another part was equally as impressed. After all, she had clearly shown a great deal of foresight and planning in that move. She had so effectively boxed him into a corner and pinned him there, it was rather impressive. If she couldn't win physically against him, she made it so that she would win mentally. From her perspective, it was likely a foolproof plan. Either she won and there was no harm done, or she lost and thereby bound him to her, and there was nothing he could do about it. He had, after all, agreed to it all, in front of a crowd of witnesses and the goddess of justice, no less. He closed his eyes and rubbed his face, the emotions warring inside, causing a knot to form in his gut. He took a few breaths and decided to take stock of things. It always helped to calm him. First, he was now apparently married, or going to be married. He wasn't too clear on the rules and regulations regarding this, so he would have to get someone to fill him in. Second, the woman he was getting married to was beautiful. She had caught his eyes the second they had landed on her. Third, she was skilled in the sword. Not as good as the old man was, but then again, he couldn't expect the same quality as a legendary swordsman in everyone who picked up the blade, could he? Fourth, she was devious. This, as he had been told by the old man, came standard with women. So he would have to learn and adapt to the situation as it evolved. And if he was to look at it from an objective perspective, then this devious was a sign of both intelligence as well as willpower, as one would need to recognize the opportunity, then be able to seize it by force of will. So, if he was going to get ensnared, it was perhaps a good thing the woman who had done so was beautiful, intelligent, and resourceful. Michaeline's hand came down on Liska's shoulder again and gave her a squeeze to get her attention again. She looked up at him. He gave her a smile and she knew hers was wan in return. "There are a lot of positives," he said. And she felt the smile slip off of her lips, fighting to be replaced with the grimace she had been sporting a lot in the last hour or so. "Think about it," he said. "You won't have to marry a noble now, you're already betrothed." She nodded slowly, latching on to what he was saying. "Then there was the fact you don't have to quit the order now, right, Durin?" he asked, turning to Durin, to her hut. No, she couldn't do it right now. She couldn't think of him like that, not so soon. It was all happening too quickly. She was about to beg off when she heard Durin speak. "Why would she have to quit the order?" he asked, as she looked at him. Michaeline answered for her, so she didn't have to. Her father was planning on marrying her off to the nobility, which would have made the entire family less a nobility. It is something he has worked for the past 10 or 12 years. Nobility doesn't join the order, it's considered too dangerous to risk them. Lysica could hear the sneer in his voice and couldn't help to agree. "No, she is clearly skilled in the blade. If she wants to continue with the order, I won't stop her," he said with a casual shrug. "She is intelligent enough to make her own decisions. I have no need to dictate to her." "Ha! See?" he said, and gave her a good slap in the back. "I can't wait to see Uncle's face when you tell him." The grin on Michaeline's handsome face twisted it into a rather strikingly frightening visage. Lysica's mind blanked. She hadn't even thought about telling her father about this. It played through her head a dozen times in a multitude of ways. Each scenario soothed her soul, and after she had mentally watched her father suffer a heart attack from the shock of disappointment, she was calm enough to look at it all from an objective point of view. There were many more positives here than she had thought. Like Michaeline had pointed out, she would no longer have to be some lord's prize, likely only taken as a wife because it was advantageous to some trade alliance with her father or something. She could continue as an Order of Odan member, free to roam. Well, mostly free. After a while betrothed, she would need to be escorted by her betrothed and another male member of her family for property's sake. And after she was married, she would be expected to be with her husband, but still, it was a vast improvement over what she had been expecting. Then there was the man she was to wed himself. Sure, she knew next to nothing about him, but that was not in any way different from how she would have been married off to a noble, without really knowing him either. In fact, she already knew more about Durin than she would about any noble if she married them. He was a rather straightforward guy, blunt to an extreme, but he was also a hard worker. One had to be in order to get to the skill level he was at, and he was willing to let her stay in the order. It wasn't hard to look at either. She snuck a glance at him and admired how tall and well-built he was. Not over-muscled, but defined for sure. His face still had a tad bit of boyish charm to it, but she could see the high cheekbones and the strong jawline. He was already handsome, and in a year or two she could see him easily becoming drop-dead gorgeous, especially if he let his hair loose and grew a beard. She shook her head, attempting to clear it of the strange and unwanted thoughts bouncing around, her cheeks darkening to a deeper shade, almost matching Michaeline's skin colour. Speaking of whom, she looked up and saw his lopsided grin, him obviously enjoying her discomfort. If you like discomfort so much, perhaps he should have some as well. She slammed the heel of her foot ferociously down on top of his toes, watching with pleasure as a smile evaporated from his lips and was replaced with a look of pain. She stepped back, and he retrieved his foot out from under her boot, hopping on one leg and cursing, tears streaming down his face. "I need to grab some things," she said, turning on her heels and walking towards the Order's compound. "When I get back, we will be making our way to Father's house to let him know the joyous news." The mental image of her father's distressed face flashed through her mind again, and she sighed in appreciation.